All right, we are live. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Frank Analysis. I am your host, Franco. I'm joined today by my good buddy Charles Anderson of the Lone Wolf Podcast. Me and him have collaborated a lot throughout the months. Actually, when I first started my channel, Frank Analysis, uh, my interview with Charles was the first new content that I had on my channel because I was originally a part of another channel called HMO Podcast, which I'm still a part of their network. But when I created my new channel, I transferred some of my videos onto Frank Analysis. And the first new content that I had on there was with my buddy Charles. So we go back a long time. Um, so yeah, I picked up a significant amount of new subscribers since then. So I thought it would be great to have Charles, who I've collaborated so much, to tell a little bit about his story, about why he got started with creating content for politics. So Charles, you want to give a little bit of background of how you got started? First with the Independent Report, how you were the vigilant independent. What motivated you to get started as a content creator for politics? Like what did you go through like in your life? What are your values? Like how did that all get started?
Well, one of the big things was, I started listening to Jesse Ventura probably around the 2011, 2012 mark a lot. And, I kind of discovered him. I'll go ahead and admit the guilt here. I watched WWE for a long time, long, long time. And so when I heard about this wrestler who was kind of doing politics, I started listening to him. And a lot of what he said just kind of stood out to me because you didn't hear anyone else that I'd ever heard, especially someone that was of like celebrity status, that was talking about how bad the Democrats and Republicans are. And I remember when I first discovered him right around that time, he had just had a book that came out called Democrips and Rebloodlicans, the two gangs in government, right? And I'm like, wow, okay. The more I listened to him, the more that I liked. And so, I kind of tried to tune into him, and then I remember he went through the whole thing with Kyle. His last name escapes me at the moment, but the one that was the American Sniper, Chris Kyle. Okay, and that's when I realized, like, oh, okay, they're coming after him. Chris Kyle was proven to be a liar in court, and yet the mainstream media still continued to demonize Jesse Ventura, saying that he bankrupted the Kyle family. He put a financial strain on Chris Kyle's widow, which was completely false. I mean, it came out in court that the insurance company of the book that was responsible for slandering, Ventura in the book, the insurance company covered all the loss. The Kyle family was put under no financial strain, but the mainstream media kept saying that they were. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So, that was kind of one of the starts that got me into this. But then eventually I started finding some YouTube channels. Obviously, I was suggested channels like the Young Turks, and I listened to them for a little bit, but it didn't take very long before I was like, okay, yeah, I don't agree with them with a lot. Probably about the first big, I guess you might say, indie media channel was Secular Talk. I started listening to Kyle, and I didn't agree with Kyle on everything either, but I agreed with him on enough. Before I got that deep into politics, I will go ahead and admit, I considered myself still an independent back then, but I was probably a lot more red than I am right now. I wound up voting for Donald Trump in 2016. Now, the only reason that I did that and voted for a Republican was simply because, at that point, I wasn't that impressed with Gary Johnson. I liked some of what I heard Jill Stein say, but at the same time, Trump had an outsider message, and a lot of things that I heard him talk about with jobs, with what happened to the jobs in this country, why NAFTA was such a bad thing, ending the wars. Everyone said he's not going to do it, but I looked at it like, okay, maybe he will, maybe he won't. We all know Hillary Clinton won't. So why am I going to go vote for her? So I gave Trump the chance, but if you followed my stuff, within a 4-year span, he didn't live up to his reputation or his promises as far as I was concerned. And I didn't vote for him this time around. I voted for the Libertarian candidate. But, you know, I have a kind of a split family. I've got half of my family who consider themselves Democrats, and then I've got half of my family who considers themselves Republicans. But there's not really anyone who they might share views when I talk to them, but they don't really consider themselves independent. So I'm kind of the first one in my family that broke out to become an independent. And so when I started this whole thing, I had just went through a job transition, and you know, it was kind of a rough time. I was being put back on a complete second shift schedule, and I'd been on first for a long time. So I started the Independent Report, and you know, I tried to just be more or less like, you know, a more calm reporter type thing. You know, even though I don't know that I was ever really a reporter, but just kind of a more calm tone. But 2020 happened. Things went on. Things happened the way they did. We had the whole, you know, the George Floyd issues. We had what was going on with defund the police. Things became just so toxic that if you took a stance and you had one disagreement, people got so bitter, and Twitter would become so hateful toward people. And finally, I said, you know, look, you know, this is just something that I do in my spare time. And, you know, what I'm seeing right now really pisses me off in the world today. And, you know, I want to build a coalition of independent people who can stand a chance of defeating Democrats and Republicans. And some of the people that I'm looking at right now and their attitude, their mentality is extremely, in my opinion, you know, counter, you know, to what I want to build. I think that what they're doing is going to cause the exact opposite effect, because they're so quick to judge because you disagree with them that they revert to name calling or whatever. And that's not conversation. That doesn't help anyone grow. And so I had that over a year ago. And when I did that, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, it's time for a rebranding. So I changed everything to the Lone Wolf Podcast, and I made the statement when I did. I said, you know, the gloves are coming off. I'm not handling this stuff with kid gloves anymore. It's going to be 100% straight to the point. And some people like it that way. Some people don't. I mean, it might not be for everyone, but at this point, you know, I'm not in this to try to make everyone happy so that they come to me and I make a lot of money. I'm just here to give my point of view. I'm also here to, you know, try to expose the system. For example, what just happened to people like yourself and Convo Couch, Nico House this past week. I think things like that need to be brought to light. But if I think there's a group of people out there, whether it be on the right or the left or the elite or whatever, that are causing problems to us being able to unite, I'm not going to hold back any punches and saying something about it either. So I went through that rebranding, and it's just call it like I see it, you know. And my opinion could always be changed, by the way. I just want everyone to know that. But there's a way you can change my opinion, and that's through civil dialogue.
Yeah. So can you tell us a bit about Southern values? Like what goes on in the South? Why is it that in the South we see more conservatives? And even when people see the duopoly, they still lean a little bit more conservative. Can you tell us a little bit more about what life in the South is? We don't have a lot of commentators who are from the South, other than a few who are like in Florida. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like why do people from the South, even when they break out of the thinking of like when they see through the illusion of the duopoly, why is it that some of them still lean a little bit more conservative than other people that are more so like in the North or in California?
So one big reason, and I'll just start here, it's still got to do with the mainstream media. The mainstream media affects whether you be from the South, the North, the West Coast, whatever, and then kind of the same way. First of all, they got the big brainwashed idea of third parties can't win. And maybe there's some credibility to that, but I think that's because if there is any credibility to it, nobody wants to vote for them because of that very argument. It's like, of course they can't win as long as you continue to vote for the two parties. As long as you're supporting that, as long as you're propping them up, third parties can't win. It's going to take people like yourself to finally put your foot down, and we all band together and stop voting for them and start voting for alternatives. So that's problem number one. The mainstream media has really sold people in that argument that you're wasting your vote. And that being said, I kind of want to give a little bit of insight into some background on me real quick that will tie into why a lot of other people feel so similar. And that is, I think we could talk about issues. I think, Ed Lee, DJL7 did a really good job. He brought, a Democrat, Republican. He called me a libertarian. I'm independent. I just voted libertarian. But he brought a bunch of people together, Steve from Slow News Day, and we all talked about issues then we agreed upon. So you could get a lot of people together that are going to agree on these issues. But the big problem comes down to how accepting are some people, of a mindset from some people within the Rust Belt. I'm going to kind of speak to this because, and maybe not everyone from here is affected the same way that I am, but, me and you've talked about this. I went through a pretty rough childhood in a lot of ways when I grew up. I had to watch a violent dad, and I had a violent stepdad at one point. But the biggest culture shock that took place to me was before my mom and dad split up. My dad made decent money. He was a truck driver, and they put me in a Christian school. Okay. I spent 6 years in this place. And when my mom and my dad split up and I moved in with my mom, she didn't have money to keep me and something like that. So I immediately made a switch to public schools. Okay. There is a huge difference in what you see in a Christian school versus a public school. And the elementary school that I was going to, you pretty much had two groups of kids. Okay. You had the rich frat white kids, the ones that were always wearing Hollister, Abercrombie Fitch, stuff like that. They lived in the nice houses. Meanwhile, I lived in the apartment complexes where most of the black and brown kids lived. And I didn't have all the name brand crap. And not to mention, this is immediately, again, a huge change in environment. I didn't fit in with that many people. But when I finally started to make some friends, it wasn't with the rich white kids because they're not my type. They look down their nose in many cases at either the black and brown kids or the poor white people that don't go out to the steakhouse dinners the way them and their family did. They had a resentment there. So because, that's who I was able to bond with as a young kid, that influenced me in a lot of ways. The problem is, and I will say this, there are racist elements still in the South. Do I think it dominates the South as a whole? I'll go ahead and say that no. Okay, but there are racist elements. And I did have people within my own family who kind of felt that way. Because that's who I bonded with, and because of all the other things I saw, I caught crap for that when I went home. Because they were like, what are you trying to be, a black kid? I caught that all the time when I went home. So when someone, because they hear a point of view that they don't agree with, wants to refer to me by derogatory terms, that hits pretty close to home for me. Now, when you asked, why does the South tend to lean more conservative? I'm going to take what I just told you and apply that to the broad spectrum. And I promise you this stands true in a lot of ways. First of all, there is a stigma surrounding people who identify themselves on the left as being snowflakes, that you can't disagree with them because if you do, they'll clutch their pearls, they'll fly off the handle, they'll call you every name in the book. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of truth to that. I mean, me and you have been talking about it, right? We've seen what happened within this past week. So when you see that happen, if you're a blue collar, hardworking guy, and this don't even just apply for the white people in the South, there's black and brown people who feel this way in my neck of the woods too. They see these people who defend elements of our society that they feel abuse them. So, for example, I've heard the argument from people in the YouTube comment section, from people on Twitter that, We can't call anyone a lazy moocher who is on welfare and just doesn't want to go out and work, that they're only in that predicament because of the elites. And I identify completely that the elites are our biggest problem. There's no doubt about that. They are the reason there are probably many of the people on welfare. They're the reason they're there today. But there are some people who are down on the totem pole that just don't care about their fellow man. They made a personal choice. They saw that the welfare system exists. They heard you could game it, and they decided, you know what, that's what I want to do. So even though they're not the biggest threat to our country as a whole, for example, and their threat is probably very minute, there are people who have to bust their butt over 40 hours a week who are paying taxes to support a welfare system in case they ever need it, because they're afraid they very well might because of how bad it is out there. And then when they see someone who wants to abuse that system, and then someone from the left comes along and says, you can't ever say anything bad about them because, if you do, you're X, Y, and Z, and these people are holy and righteous, that you immediately take steps back. So that's a big problem. Is there's disagreement on probably economic style. There's disagreement on why certain people do a certain thing. And instead of sitting down and talking about it, when you jump straight to the name calling like that, you take all those blue collar people in the Rust Belt who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, one job, two jobs. They know what they see. They know what they feel. They know what they do every day. And when you start, basically tossing out their personal experiences that they've seen in day-to-day life and tell them, no, you're wrong, because I learned in school that the psychology of this results in this. They start to not take you seriously. And that is the biggest problem. Is number one, we can both agree probably that those people that I was referring to who are trying to gain welfare, again, they're not the biggest threat to our country. So why make that a focal point of anything? You have a simple disagreement on why they are the way they are, but they're not the biggest threat. What you're going to agree upon is that the biggest threat comes from the greedy moochers at the top of the system. So why are we going to spend all this time debating about the people who don't really have the biggest impact on our society as a whole? But the minute you heard me or someone else say that, you turn the whole conversation into that. And then immediately you just start to tear the two sides apart. Meanwhile, again, there's probably lots you're going to agree upon: ending the wars, the issues with big pharma, the jobs, the income, the greed at the top, the rigged, democracy that they're rigging the system against us for themselves, the censorship. You're going to agree on so much. But the minute you hear that one thing you don't agree with, and there's probably people on the right who are the same way, and they're just as guilty of this. But the minute you hear something you don't agree with, instead of talking it out, and if you agree or don't agree, set it off to the side, they start fighting. They start this pissing contest. And these people need to understand, if you want unity, you need to come together on a core set of issues, work together long enough to get your country back from the control of Democrats and Republicans, and worry about the disagreements after the fact. But you squabble about it now. I've been saying this for months. The elites that you despise and I despise are going to sit back, pop the popcorn, and enjoy the movie, because they're getting nothing but a kick out of you dividing yourselves over issues that you yourself claim aren't the biggest threat to society. So why are we arguing about it?
Yeah. What some people need to realize is that the country is big. People are brought up in different ways, and in many cases, some people, it's not their fault. They're born into a family that's racist, and then they absorb all this information. They are brought up with lies for a significant portion of their developmental lives. The same is true for people that are born in other parts of this country that are more quote unquote progressive, but they are brought up with values that the mainstream media wants people to believe, the liberal mainstream media, that into thinking that America is still exceptional and that we do all these things in other countries because we want to distribute democracy and we want to distribute human rights. Regardless, throughout the entire country, we are brought up with lies. And it's great that more people are breaking out of this and realizing the illusion that a lot of people are in. But we have to be patient with other people, because not everybody is going to realize the same thing at the same time. You yourself have realized a lot of things, but you were still brought up in a different region. You were brought up with different values. Um, and if there's a disagreement, what good is it if we're gonna be like insulting each other? That we're just gonna take things personally that way, and then we're gonna get distracted from the bigger issues that we agree with. Um,
Absolutely.
like if we like, how is insulting somebody going to change their mind, right? It's just gonna make them more angry and think that they're being oppressed. Like it's like you think that if you call somebody like a Nazi or like a Nazbol or something, you're gonna be like, oh man, can't believe I was called a Nazi. I gotta change the way I think. No, and there's more of a chance that people are going to take that personally, not gonna want to associate with you, and then that'll further create division and less of an understanding. So that's a lesson I want
Absolutely.
people to take away from here is when there's a disagreement with somebody, don't lash out insults at them. Like I understand that you can be angry at some of the things that they say, but understand that they went through things in their life that led them to believe certain things. And the best way you can change their mind about something is if you converse with them, not by lashing out insults.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll put it to you like this. And I don't remember the lyrics word for word. I've heard the song maybe two or three times at this point, but I kind of referenced to the recent Tom McDonald song "Fake Woke." He literally says inside the song, um, you know, they knew that, you know, how did he put it? Like racism was a hot commodity. So they marketed it to sell, and they knew we would buy up all the boxes and divide us ourselves. So he's talking about the way mainstream media has pitched this stuff for years. They created this system where people they don't need to necessarily divide you. They've brainwashed enough people, even when they think sometimes they're woke from the system, that they immediately do what we just described. They even though this wasn't necessarily racism, they're buying into the division and then dividing us themselves. It's like you said, Franco. I've been accused within the last week of not being willing to accept anyone else's point of view other than my own, and that I don't want to converse with anyone who doesn't agree with me. So, just for the record, when me, you, Israel, Pierce, Dak Rouleau, Reed Coverdale, any of these people we've done these collaborations with, have I agreed with every single one of you every single time you all have
No.
said something?
I remember we debated a lot with the BLM stuff, and we went a lot. We had a big back and forth on Twitter, but I mean, we're still willing to get together and talk about other
That's
stuff,
it.
right?
I mean, and to be fair, my opinion on some of the BLM stuff was changed to a degree. Some of it I still kind of hold true to. For example, when we talk about like with statues, for example, I still feel, that if you're going out and doing that by force, you're only playing into their hands because they're able to, the mainstream media, of course, mostly defended it, but there was also a group of people who just looked at it as disrespectful or whatever. And, again, they're pitting that right versus left because they know at this point, right, don't trust CNN. So when CNN comes out and defends it, they're like, oh, okay, so yeah, I need to be against this. They do it. They've divided us just so well. Again, go listen to the Tom McDonald song. I thought, even if you don't agree with everything he said, I thought it was great. I thought it was a breath of fresh air that someone, actually is calling this stuff out. But, yeah, we don't agree on everything all the time. But that's the beautiful thing. We don't need to. What we need to do is be able to sit down and talk. And you know me long enough to know that as long as someone is willing to sit down and talk with me, even if we come away from it not necessarily agreeing on everything, I'm going to have civil conversation. The only thing that really gets under my skin is when I come to the table to have civil, discussion, and then someone else comes and approaches me with complete disrespect. Where I come from, and this might be something from my culture that's a downfall, I guess you could say. It could be to my own detriment, but I'm very old school in the fact you respect me, I respect you. If you disrespect me and you piss me off and you keep on, then I'll probably say something to you. And I, it just kind of goes back to the old mentality. Don't F with me and I won't F with you,
Yeah. And I will say, we're all of us here, like people who view this channel, you, Charles, people who view your channel, we're all going to experience at some point, like when we talk to liberals or when we talk to conservatives who are still in the matrix, are going to feel some kind of resistance to holding on to what they believe is true. And sometimes they get emotional and they will lash out and throw insults at us. We have to understand that they're still going through their process of waking up, and we have to try to not take it so personally, because if we do and then we like throw insults back or just like keep going at it, then it's just going to further distract and further create more division. I will say, I do admire what Big Talk, Little Talk, Israel does. He's been insulted and called a racist and called all this stuff a lot, and he still goes out of his way and try to converse with people still. I see propaganda in the chat right now. He was Israel said some stuff that people didn't like, and propaganda was trying to educate Israel on it, but he was also being a little bit mean to Israel. But Israel didn't take it personally. He still went after propaganda. They conversed, and there was an understanding that was built. So yeah, that I will say that Israel, if you're watching this, that's something that I do admire that you do, is that when people come at you and they insult you, you don't try to hold it too personally. You still try to see the good in people, and then you still try to converse with them to try to get them to understand you. And then even though you're still stubborn about a lot of things, I know you try to understand what the other person tries to say.
And one thing that I'll add to that is, and I will admit this, with some of the stuff that was said about me, I mean, I took it pretty personal, and I responded in a lot of ways, whether it be through comments or on Twitter or whatever. But I'm good about certain things, just brushing it off because I kind of anticipated it was going to come. But I guess there's still there, like I was explaining earlier. I have certain demons with certain things from what I watched growing up. When you go through a very rough childhood, that's why there for a good solid few years I turned into a pill popper. Okay, and that's why to this day, if I ever wound up being put on pain medication, I'm afraid to do that, because I'm afraid that I might start trying to pop these things again. So that's something that worries me about ever trying to get on anything like that for the injuries that I've got right now. That was a very rough period in my life. There's certain things, and when you go and you say this stuff, for anybody that wants to hop in these comment sections, if you're here to, I'll say this, if you're here to watch our content, there's obviously going to be the trolls out there, and you can't control that, but I can usually tell who's a troll and who's not. But, be respectful enough to hear them out, because there's points in time you don't know what you might say to someone that's going to hit them. And of course, I've been told, well, if it affected you that personally, then that must mean that you really trying to hide something. You must really be it. No, it just means that I grew up with certain issues involving that, and I made a vow that I was never going to be that years ago. And so for you to just toss a term around, and I'm not going to go into details there. If you know. But for you to just toss that term around that loosely because you didn't like one thing you heard someone say, that's very careless, in my opinion. You don't know how throwing some of these terms around are going to affect someone. And so, I'll admit, did I probably handle it in the best of ways? No. Do I always go off when someone says something negative about me? No. Probably the last time that I really had something to say about someone is when they came after you and a few other people on Twitter, and then they wanted to make things personal with me on the Twitter DMs. And the difference is they were an actual content creator. But we each need to be adults. That's probably something I need to work on. I'm for sure. But for anyone who wants to come on and watch these videos, you need to understand something. We're not here for just petty squabbles. We are here to try and talk over issues to figure out what we can all agree upon, how we can get change, what change is going to be the best, and what we can do as a country. If you can't respect that, if you can't respect that we've got multiple voices in the room, if you can't respect the fact that we are not an echo chamber here to just talk about all the things that you want to hear, then go find a YouTube channel who is. Don't come into comment sections just to be rude to people and start name calling because you have a disagreement. Because if that's how you want to handle things, you're counterproductive to a true unity movement. We need open-minded people from the right, from the left, from the libertarians, from the Greens. We need people who are fighting the same battles, whether they realize it or not, to talk to each other, come together, and realize we got to work together if we want to take our country back. And to come on and because you hear the first thing you don't agree with, take that attitude, you're counterproductive to what we're trying to do here. I mean, if you disagree with that, I mean, you give your take, but that's mine. We need people who are open-minded, willing to accept that they might have disagreements with other people and still be civil.
Yeah, 100%, Charles. Yeah. I'm glad that you came on and we discussed this. Like, I want people to understand each other. We need to understand that we're all brothers and sisters here, and we all share a common enemy that's oppressing us, and that's the predator class. Charles, where can people find you?
You can find me over on YouTube at the Lone Wolf Podcast, over on Twitter at Vigilant into P1, INDEPE1. I try to post at least a couple of times a week, working 40 hours a week. Sometimes you got to figure out how to do the schedule, but you can find me over there. And then I make the rounds a lot, go on other people's channel. This Friday, if everything holds up, I'll be on Big Talk, Little Talk as well.
There you have it, folks. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to stay informed. I love you all and stay conscious. Take care, everybody.